if I can find a benefit for every single person who's going to touch this new system that has nothing to do with cost cutting or to do with, overall benefits for the business, then it's going to be the slam dunk that you want it to be.
You're listening to What's Cooking, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of what it takes to run and scale a successful hospitality business. I'm Conor Sheridan, founder and CEO of Nori. I've been in the trenches running and growing fast-paced restaurants myself. And if you're leading multiple sites and struggling with the pressure of building the plane while you're flying it, you're in the right place. Our goal for each episode is to bring you real, actionable insights from those who are on the ground leading these businesses. I previously sat down with Kate Nichols, Chair of UK Hospitality, to break down the UK budget and what it really means for operators. From national insurance hikes to rising wage costs, the message was clear. Operators are being asked to do more with less again. But while policy sets the stage, it's operators who have to play on it. That's why today we're shifting gears from policy to practice. My guest today is someone who's taken brands through the operational deep end and come out the other side. Alison Wong is the Chief Financial Officer at House of Gods Hotel, a fast-growing, private equity-backed boutique brand expanding into London. Her story spans over 15 years in hospitality, from finance at every side of the table, from professional services in Deloitte to senior finance roles at startups and scale-ups, private equity at Imbiba, and founding her own strategic financial consultancy. Alison brings a serious perspective on scaling smart, making operationally relevant decisions with finance and embedding clarity into complexity. She knows what it takes to turn numbers into decisions and vision into process, especially when the stakes are high and speed matters. Let's get into it. Alison, welcome to What's Cooking. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you are the first CFO ever on the podcast. So
I feel very privileged.
I'm very excited for this episode. Having come from a finance background myself, it's the most exciting one for me. So thank you for joining. Before we get started, it'd be great to get a bit of an intro from you on how you came to be CFO at House of Gods and a bit on your background.
Yeah, I'm Alison Wong. I'm CFO of House Gods Hotel, which is a private equity-backed boutique hotel business. We're currently just about to expand into London for a flagship site. I've been in hospitality my entire career, so from and seen every side of the table, really. I would say from professional services with Deloitte to startups, scale-ups, private equity, as well as now back in-house. I've also done consultancy work and kind of strategic consultancy as well in the past. So yeah, it's been a varied career, but always in hospitality.
Nice. So you've seen every side of the table, which is super interesting. So I'm excited to dig in. When you think around House of Gods, for those who don't know, it's an incredible concept of a boutique experience, but it's also got that private equity edge, as you mentioned, which will enable it to scale. How do you manage the operational rigor required to be a PE-backed company, but maintain maybe the high-touch element of the concept?
Private equity it probably gets a bad rep for, saying everything needs to be about cost cutting, etc. But actually a large part of it is about preserving the experience and what is special about the business. And what is really special about House Gods is the human element of it. We provide milk and cookies at the touch of a button at night. At the touch of a button, you get a glass of Prosecco delivered to your room. Those things are non-negotiables. I think a big part of it is about understanding what those non-negotiables are, protecting those. Where cost cutting exercise should happen is, does this mean our teams can get to spend more time with our guests? If it doesn't, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, I like that. Focus on the right things, right? The guest experience, the retention.
Absolutely.
Nice. How do you think about that? Like, how do you think around trying to find and implement initiatives that protect the team's time to focus on guest experience?
I think about it in a couple of ways, to be honest. There's a lot about, tech out there, which is about automations, making lives easier for our teams. The thing I ask myself always is, if I'm explaining this to a team member as to why they should adopt this new system or this new way of working, this new process, can I give them a benefit to them in such a way that has no impact, that doesn't mention cost cutting whatsoever? that has to be the side benefit. But as a team member, I don't care if we're cost cutting in a way. I do, but that's my job as the CFO. That's what I need to get to. But they need to see a benefit in order for them to adopt it.
Yeah, and it'll reduce the friction to change as well. If that becomes a primary motive, there's going to be a resistance to change versus the main thing, which is the guest, right?
100%. And I've been reading recently about something called the status quo bias. I don't know if you've heard of it, but essentially in order for someone to implement a process and really be glad to be adopting it, your new process has to be exponentially better than the existing one, because no one actually likes change.
Yeah. I was actually at a summit where there was a bunch of CTOs talking about delivering AI and coding agents into the business. And they said the change is so transformational that if you strive for 20 or 30% more, it won't happen. You should strive 5x more, and maybe you only get 20 or 30%, but you need to it needs to be so far removed from the status quo that you're trying to change to get people to all rally behind it. So I thought it was super interesting. It's similar to hospitality. If you incrementally change the ways of working, we'll default back to status
100%.
quo. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So thinking about it from a CFO lens, you have an interesting perspective. You would assume that it's about metrics, costs, bottom line profits, but you've touched on the human side of it. You've touched on guest engagement as a primary metric. What are the kind of traffic light things you look at in a business as a CFO to understand whether it's going well or not going well?
A lot of it is about combining your qualitative data with your quantitative data. Of course, you have to look at your numbers. Of course, you have to look at, in a hotel lens, you have to look at ADR, you have to look at your RevPAR. They are your key metrics. But how does that translate into guest feedback? How does that translate into, repeat visits even? We are constantly looking at our demographic and how this shifts to make sure that we're actually aligning what our offering is with our shifting demographic.
We did an episode recently on the budget with Kate Nichols, and she talked a lot about like the structural changes for businesses like hotels and pubs due to like the rateable changes. So the more successful businesses in terms of revenue might be the most penalized, if you will. You touched on before when we spoke around the cost structure having shifted in the business, and businesses on the ground today are trying to optimize or fine tune things like labor deployment or gross margin. How do you think around what they need to do to be successful going forward in terms of a structural change? Does that need to happen in the business, or do you think people can optimize their way out?
It might be controversial, but I don't think optimizing is the right answer anymore. So, if we look back at 5 years ago, minimum wage was £8 something. We're now going into a position where minimum wage is about to become £12.72. That's almost a 50% increase over the course of 5 years. On top of that, you've got utilities, which has almost doubled. You've got the associated costs of national minimum wage and impacting every other side of a hospitality business. So that's laundry, that's cleaning, that's everything that goes along with it. We, as hospitality businesses, can't have increased our prices by 50%. So optimizing your rota, optimizing your cost-cutting exercise, trimming 10% here, 5% there, is not going to make a dent in your 50% increase in cost base. So we have to think about this from the bottom up, I think. You have to start from the very beginning and go, okay, if I were building a new business today, how would I do it? And how do I go about making this as efficient as possible? And think about our hospitality businesses, the way we operate, the way we build our menus, the way we train our teams, every single bit of it. How do we make it fit the world we live in today? Otherwise, we're never going to get back to the stage where, there are sustainable profits. We've seen lots of closures and lots of big name closures as well in the last 6-9 months. And I'm sorry to say, I think there are more coming. But what we're currently doing is not cutting the mustard.
So almost redefining what an org structure even would look like today versus what was there previously. You mentioned all across the business. So if you take some examples in casual dining, for example, there's always been like a legacy pyramid structure in a business. You're saying maybe turn it on its head and go, as of today, what trade looks like today, the patterns and the behaviors, how would you build that org design to match that versus trying to optimize?
100%. If you were to start with a blank sheet of paper, where would you end up? And this comes back to your point, about CTO saying, actually, you should shoot for 100 times more than where you actually want to be. Yeah. So think of it as a blank sheet of paper. Look at what you've currently got. how far can you reach to get to that point? And what do you have to do in your planning to get you to that closer and closer to, I guess, the ultimate goal, if that's where you want to call it.
Such a different way of thinking than I think the industry is used to.
Yes.
Taking the ship off course and doing big radical swings is usually let's do things that don't take the focus off the main thing, which is trade, and don't deviate that. So that's a scary place to be.
Yeah,
But
we're not very
exciting
good
one
at
too.
that.
Yeah. Just thinking back to my own engagements and how people think about change processes. And you mentioned this previously, that when people look to invest in automation or change or big transformational change, they tend to get in their own way a bit, just either culturally or ways of working. Many examples of that, both from being an investor and an operator, where you've seen that?
Yeah, I think, quite often every bit of those changes comes from the head office, right? And sales teams are incredible. They tell you their system will solve every single one of your problems. But the reality is, have we asked the person who's actually going to be doing it? Have we asked the person who's actually going to be impacted by the automation how to make it the best it could be for them? And what are the unintended consequences? So yes, great, we've automated this one singular thing. What's the next step that needs to happen? How does that get impacted by this automation? Do we need to change our processes there? It's thinking that through every step of the way and actually involving someone on the ground every step of the way to make sure you've got, when you do make a change, it does work. I've been burnt by this. Early in my career, can you tell?
Yeah, I can imagine, right? Because people often don't think around the second or third order consequences of a move. You think about the primary metric and thing you want to change, and you don't think downstream.
No.
There's an analogy of spinning plates in hospitality. If the head office spins a certain speed, everything else goes 10 times faster down the chain.
Exactly.
What do you do today to offset that when you look at change in House of Gods or other projects? How do you think around qualifying whether a change is worth it, the ROI, and how you approach it? How is it different today than maybe early in your career?
I don't pretend to know everything anymore.
I like that.
I try and involve the person that is going to be doing the doing. Ask them where that pain point is, understand what we need to do to make it easiest for them, and then ask the next person and the next person. You almost want to mock through how the new world is going to work. And every single one of those people will tell you that singular quirk that you've never even heard of. And you need to solve that quirk before you can move on.
That's interesting. It's like on the product side, product development, we do a lot of those we call discovery sessions. So you'll do discovery with maybe the economic buyer, the HQ team, and then you'll go downstream and go, who's the primary user of this, do a discovery, and then a second tier users of that. One thing that we struggle with is, how do you take the signal from the noise sometimes? Because when you meet so many different people, everybody wants
Different
everything,
things.
right? Or different things that can actually be conflicting. And so the hard thing is, how do you bring that together and make a coherent plan?
100%. But I think also ultimately head office ends up with more weight more often than not than the teams. And actually, if the system is going to benefit the teams, head office needs to get out of the way slightly.
Yeah, I agree. When you look at your own kind of checklist internally for assessing a change or an investment into a system, we were speaking earlier and you mentioned things are tight in the industry. So freeing up budget to make change is challenging. So it really needs to be a home run number one, which is probably criteria number one. Yeah. But beyond that, what kind of decision criteria do you look at? Or do you have a checklist where you go, okay, this system change is going to be worth it?
I am ultimately an accountant, so a big part of it is sensitivity. So, if we only get to 80% of where we thought we were going to, is it still the home run that you want it to be? Because otherwise you may well be better off deploying your capital somewhere else, to your point about there being limited resources right now. And it comes back to what we were talking about before. How do I explain it to someone else? If I can find a benefit for every single person who's going to touch this new system, that has nothing to do with cost cutting or to do with, overall benefits for the business, then it's going to be the slam dunk that you want it to be. It makes it quite simple almost, but it's actually quite hard to do in practice.
I can imagine it's different lenses. You've got finance, ops, technology, people, usually all involved as key stakeholders. Yeah. So how do you get like the intertwining success metrics that meet everyone's needs. It's
Exactly.
challenging.
But as a starting point, you can't make anyone's life harder.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at previous change, you mentioned you were burned at it. Any kind of patterns that you see for why things land successfully or don't land successfully?
I think a lot of it is to do with planning. I've done it in the past and, earlier in my career, at the haste of trying to save a bit of money, we were trying to integrate two new businesses, POS systems, stock management systems, you just pick one. Just pick one out of the two. But ultimately, by doing it quickly, not really thinking through, to your point, doing that product discovery, understanding exactly what every business needs, depending on their different operating models, whatever it might be, you go live and you run into 50 issues you hadn't anticipated. And actually fixing those 50 issues once you've gone live is so much harder and so much more time consuming and loses so much more trust within your team as well, in terms of buy-in, than it would be to fix those 50 problems beforehand.
We've seen that as well. People will come in with us at scale and look to go, we want to deploy this into the entire estate immediately. And we have to almost pump the brakes to go, it's better to ring fence and test it and eke out those differences across the different sites, different teams who are going to be using the system, ways of working, learn from that, and then you unlock it to a different cohort, maybe the next cohort, and you scale iteratively. I think the fear in hospitality is if the change is too long or too arduous, it won't land. And it's almost like ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Again, it's how do you don't take the focus off trade, which is the main thing, and technology is seen as a distraction, an implementation.
Yeah. And inevitably, the first site you implement a new system into is your gold star site, right? It's the one that it follows every process perfectly, listens to everything you say, does everything to the best of their abilities, and it's 100% site. So of course everything will work there.
But as you scale it.
As you move to other sites, and, no shade to anyone, we all know we've got our gold star sites and our slightly less optimal sites.
Yeah, definitely seen that. So taking a bit of a view on the private equity experience and the operator experience, what's different about being embedded in a business as a CFO versus managing a portfolio of companies as a PE operator?
I think the thing that doesn't change is that you have to spend loads of time within the business. Whether I was in consultancy, whether I was in private equity, whether, today when I'm in-house or where I have been in-house previously, I will spend as much time as I possibly can in the actual sites. That's the joy of hospitality. You can see it, you can feel it, you can experience it. When you're in consultancy, when you're in private equity, is much more big picture. There has to be will for change within the business in order for you to be able to affect change. But you can do more ambitious things. There tends to be a greater desire for change within the culture as it is, because there's a goal to be hit. Whereas when you're in-house, there's more stakeholder management, internal culture changes that you have to do. But actually, the really nice part of it is you can course correct as you go. You can see something isn't quite hitting right, and you can shift it a little bit and go, okay, yeah, actually, if I do this, you can tailor that to the exact situation that you see yourself in. Whereas when you're looking after a portfolio, you will never know that nuance. You have to rely on someone else who's within the business to then tell you that nuance or to adjust it as they go.
It's very cool. It's a really interesting perspective. It's like the different incentives as well a little bit. You have a portfolio approach to work where you have multiple bets or multiple things, and when you're an operator you get the one thing, so there's always going to be a different incentive or way of working. And then on terms of the metrics, as operators you tend to look at leading metrics as much as lag metrics to make those changes, which is cool. So you've seen a lot of shapes and sizes of hospitality businesses, some being incredible successes, some maybe not have worked out as well as you would have liked. What is the pattern recognition that you see, or say, that makes a great business? And then separate to that, what are the patterns you see where people often trip up or make mistakes?
I think consistency is potentially an underrated thing, particularly as you scale, particularly as you're growing quickly. But consistency whilst maintaining the ability to keep certain parts of individuality maintaining that agility to be able to make changes, do something a bit different. I think that's probably what I've seen as the key to success. There are businesses out there which are at 30, 50 sites, and they remain incredibly consistent. Every time you go, you get the same service, you get the same result. You still feel like it's an independent, restaurant, but it's just done really, really well.
I love that. We use that word as our core value prop, or try to be a core value prop as well.
Really?
So guests expect consistency, same experience at 9 a.m. or 11 p.m., same smile, same quality of product, same feeling. But in the business, consistency, you want the same decisions made for the same scenarios to make sure that you have like that mechanical way almost of running ops or finance. Things should move consistently. So that's really interesting.
And how do you maintain that flair outside of the consistency? Because you need that, right? Particularly in the world that you're in, right? We all live in right now. It's about social media, it's about eyeballs, it's about, retaining attention. The question is probably, how do you find that flair within the consistency? So everyone always feels the same, but there's always something new to talk about.
How do you manage that with House of Gods, right? The flair is obviously key to the value prop, but I can imagine there's a cost attached to that. So when you're looking at it from a financial point of view or looking at the P&L, how do you manage that, or how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, the one thing we don't struggle with is flair within House of Gods, I would say. To be honest, it's about I think it's giving creatives the freedom to roam. You have to set tight parameters, around budget, etc. But here's a pot of money. Go do what you want to do with it. That's an ideal scenario, but there's also has to be trust that whoever is in charge of that project is going to use those pennies wisely.
Yeah, fair.
And create the best possible outcome. Particularly as you scale, when you are a founder, you'll know this, when you're bootstrapping, when you are, when you're going through tough times, you watch every penny like you're spending it out of your own pocket. And the minute, when investment comes in, when things are flying, it gets harder to maintain that discipline over and over again. So how do you give that flexibility to say, here, go be creative, whilst having the trust that that person is going to treat every pound like their own?
Yeah, very challenging. You don't want to be a bottleneck, but you also need to retain that culture. I think the example of Bezos and Amazon comes to mind, where they might have had hundreds of millions of dollars, yet he was driving the 20-year-old Honda and repurposed the doors as desks and these kind of things. Keep the fruit, and frugality was a key value of the business.
Yes.
Which I think is key. So to go back to the original question, the flip side of the patterns of success. So consistency is what you've seen to be successful. What are common failure points or trip ups that you've seen in businesses that get into financial or operational trouble?
I think it's what we spoke about. It's the bloat that happens, is the lack of discipline that happens over time because things are perhaps going well, or the scale of the business grows beyond the capabilities of the management team. They can no longer keep handle on exactly what's going on. They haven't built the processes in place to be able to see the early warning signs to course correct before it goes wrong. It's really hard to do. People who are scaling businesses don't tend to think about how they need to put in their processes so that it still works at site 10, site 20, site 30. But actually, when you're at site 3 is probably when you should be thinking about it. But it's really hard to persuade yourself as a founder, as a management team, to make those plans then, because you're focusing on the next site, the next opening, how your P&L looks, where your next, paycheck is going to come from.
Yeah. And there's a big fear of like over-indexing on bureaucracy and early on, right? Versus maybe the nimble culture that got you to the 3 successful sites or 4 successful sites.
That is also a problem as you scale, though. The agility of it, when you've got 3, 5 sites, it's very easy to make a change. If I want to change a menu, it takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe. If you've got 30 sites, 100 sites, it might take 3 months, 4 months. So how do you build into your 3-4 month cycle as you scale those points where you can course correct slightly? You may not be able to change your whole menu, but you might build in some things that means you can change 2 or 3 things that just aren't working, whether that's operationally or customer facing.
Yeah, it's nice. I like that. It's a completely different mindset. It's a completely different cadence and flow to run in the business. You have to think in different time frames and
Yes.
yeah, both from execution and how it's going to land.
Yeah. And I think you have to think so much further ahead than you perhaps want to. As a smaller business and as a kind of, if you, particularly I've seen if you start as a founder, you tend to think about the next week, the next month. You're always thinking about, it's almost always, it's not firefighting because actually it's just your immediate future. But you have to start thinking about what happens in 6 months, because actually you need to spend that time bringing everyone else on the journey with you to get to the stage where you can do what you need to in 6 months' time.
Yeah, definitely. When we look at scaling, you mentioned going from 3 to 10 to 20 to 30. For CFOs listening to this episode, what advice would you give them to successfully go from, say, 10 to 30 sites in terms of that growth journey? What should they be looking at? What systems or processes are fundamental to be successful?
It comes back to what we've just been talking about, is how do you build in consistency and how do you build in those early warning signals? So, when you've got 3 sites, when you've got 10 sites, you will look at every site in detail as the CFO. That's doable, and you can spend that time doing that. When you've got 30 sites, you lose sight of the detail. So how do you think about it now when you're still at 3 or 10? To start building in some fail safes where as you get to 30, you'll still get those early warning flags. You can still benchmark against every business to find the one thing that goes really well in one site that you could put across every other site. The one thing that's doing really badly that you need to make sure doesn't happen in every other site. It comes back, annoyingly, it comes back to planning.
Yeah. Always super interested. If you have like a weekly business review or weekly metrics review or monthly, what would be on your kind of CFO scorecard that you look at that would give you the signal whether things are going right or wrong? You mentioned like RevPAR and balancing the qual, but do you have like a cadence of when you look at metrics? I'd be interested to know what they look like.
Yeah, I think in the hotel world it's slightly different. You rely a lot on your competitors. So, SDR data, for those in hotels will know, you rely a lot on your competitor set. But actually what you rely on more than how your competitor set did is the trend of how you're comparing to your competitor set. If you're always 20% above them and you suddenly 18% above them, you might start thinking, oh, maybe let's watch this. And if it happens 2-3 weeks in a row, go, okay, something is happening. We need to dig deeper. So for me, it's actually less about the one thing and what is happening in that week. It's about the upwards trends, the downwards trends, the future bookings, the forecasts, and how those trends are going. And it's the same with, guest metrics. It's, how many 5-star reviews are you getting? How many 3-star reviews are you getting? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing?
I like that. Yeah. It's like the trends and the ratios.
Absolutely.
I spoke to a CEO, ex-CEO of a big hospitality business, who then went on to be the CEO of a large technology business focused on hospitality. I asked that question around what do you look at? And he's just like ratios. How are they moving? What do they look like relative to each other over time? They will tell the story better than anything else. So it's like what you said there. You can't look at anything standalone. You need to look at.
Such a better way of talking about it.
It wasn't from me. It was from him. I stole it. So it's obviously a technology podcast too. So I have to ask some questions on tech and how you use it. In House of Gods and broadly when you look at the industry, AI is a big either buzzword or a big unlock. Do you have a POV on that, and how are you using it in your business today?
It's something that, personally, I am exploring a lot how AI can do things better for me personally, for our teams, and we're very much, from a House Gods perspective, I'd say we're still very much at the infancy of our journeys. We've been thinking about various things, in terms of not chatbots as such, but people, technology that could provide you with automated messaging based on the tone of voice of someone within House Gods. We would think about, having essentially a bank of responses in place, but you could still reach that human if that's what you want to do, which is the most crucial thing to our point of having that human, retaining that human connection. But if I just want to change my booking for the rooftop bar, I should just be able to do that without having to speak to someone, because we've got enough technology for that. But coming back to your point of, it has to be a slam dunk for any hospitality business right now to be implementing a new system, particularly something like AI, which is perhaps less well understood. I think the bar is still very high for small, medium-sized businesses like House Gods and the businesses that I currently work with. For enterprises, they need to go out and do the trial and error. But actually, I think we should be starting much smaller than that. What in your day-to-day can you just repeatable things that you can automate? So I'm starting to look at things within the finance function to say, actually, is there one spreadsheet, let's start there, that is very difficult and very annoying to do, but I could just spend 2 hours, 3 hours training an LLM to repeat that for me every single month, every single week.
They always say what's the best way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So if you can get through that and get people bought in and see the change from a small, narrow use case, then you can start to get people to go behind it and go, well, what's the next one? The next one.
Yeah.
It's
You
really
almost
smart.
want to go to every person's feet and say, can you tell me what the most annoying part of your week is that you have to do every single day, every single month, every single week? And just go one by one. And actually, sometimes it's not even AI, right? Sometimes it's just someone with a different set of expertise who will just be able to do something. I remember having a conversation with a chef once, and he just said to me, calculating gross margins are really annoying for a new dish that I'm doing. Okay, fine. And I just spent 10 minutes, wrote him a quick Excel spreadsheet, said, just do this, 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 and this. I'll give you the perfect result every time. I was able to do that in 10 minutes.
A huge unlock for him. Yeah.
It's a huge unlock for him. I think we try too hard to find the really big things that move the needle massively, when actually smaller things will move the needle slightly, but they all compound as well.
It's really nice. It's a really nice way to finish that. When we talked about it needs to be a slam dunk, but you need to do it iteratively, I think it goes back to probably the macro pressure in the industry and the fear of making change. It almost feels like you have to make such a gargantuan leap forward for it to be worth it.
But it comes back to, we are so worried about the day-to-day business as usual operations. That's the stuff that helps business as usual operations. But as a leadership team, as, the founders, etc., our role is to look at the big stuff, right? Our role is to start with a blank sheet of paper and see how we can change things in the next 18 months, 12 months, whatever that might be. But that doesn't mean at the same time we shouldn't be doing all the things that we could do that take 3 hours, 5 hours to make things more efficient at the same time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We're going to move into the quick turn. So this next segment, it's a list of rapid fire questions. Rapid fire means different things to different people. It could be 5 minutes per question. It could be 10 seconds. So I'll leave it up to you. I'll leave it to you. If you could wave a wand and fix one system or process in a hospitality business tomorrow, what would it be?
Okay, I'm going to go for a big one. I want to be able to look at qualitative and quantitative data together. So I want to understand my marketing metrics at the same time as looking at how it correlates with my revenue and the trends around that.
Yeah, and have the commentary from the management team next to it.
Exactly. How do I feed in every word, every review from a customer from Google and link that up with the actual numbers? I realize I'm asking for the world.
Nice. What's one piece of advice you'd give a CFO to joining a hospitality business for the first time?
Spend more time than you think you should on site.
Interesting. Not in the metrics, but with the people.
But until you understand exactly how every single one of those processes work, you don't know how you can help. And how can you define the strategy of a business without understanding it?
I really like that. Even as a small example, I was speaking earlier that we forward deploy our data science team into businesses. And one of the use cases is around labor deployment and productivity. And on the face of it, you could see one outlier venue in a group and like, this is not performing so well. And you get on site and you see it's operating over 6 floors. You have to leave the venue to go get something out of a fridge, which is in a car park, or just structural things that the metrics only tell one part of the story.
Yeah.
It's very cool. What's a trend in hospitality tech that you're personally quite skeptical about?
Completely contactless guest experiences. And, don't get me wrong, I think there should be a choice. You should have a choice of having a completely contactless guest experience. But most people go to hospitality businesses because they want that human connection. They go to a bar, they go to a restaurant. They want to interact with someone. It can't be all or nothing. And I think people are starting to get back to that now after kiosks and, being all kiosk, QSR. I think we're getting back to the stage where we are doing a hybrid model, which is exactly where we should be.
Give people what they want, where they want, and how they want it.
Isn't that the crux of hospitality?
Yeah, for sure. But also people want great service, not just fast service. I think that automation has been a default for, okay, service has not been great, maybe due to various issues. So how do we just automate it rather than make it great again, which is much harder to do.
Exactly.
What's the most impactful operational change you've made with an investment budget of under 10K? Which is quite a narrow question, I know.
I'm going to give a ridiculous one. A washing machine.
Okay. Can you unpack that?
This is quite recent, so maybe it's recency bias. But we bought washing machines in our hotels relatively recently, and it was paid back overnight. It's a £500 investment, and it transformed the housekeeping team and how they were able to do what they needed to do. It actually saved costs as well, but it was such a small change, but just the way in which the housekeeping team could do what they needed to do transformed. It was so much easier. The friction, it reduced friction significantly. Previously, they were sending off various things to the laundry company. It wouldn't come back for a week. They could just do it now.
Nice. Force multiplier of a change.
Exactly. No, and it wasn't £10,000, so.
You can always get 20 of them, right, for that. So there you go. Last one, finish this sentence. A great CFO in hospitality needs to
figure out how to say yes, but responsibly.
Excellent. Thank you, Alison. That was awesome. Thanks so much
thanks
for
for
joining.
having me.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks.
What a banger of an episode with Alison, our first ever Chief Financial Officer on What's Cooking. What really stood out for me in the episode was two things. What makes operators successful is consistency and taking a product discovery mindset to helping implement change. Alison talked about whether it's what the guest experiences or what the team engages with on a day-to-day basis, consistency is the goal and the outcome. But also for your teams internally, your operating cadence, how you plan, how you make decisions, how you execute. Consistency is key to be successful in hospitality. Really, really like that. Second, Alison talks with a real product discovery mindset when talking about change and transformation in hospitality. Going through the key stakeholders of any kind of system implementation or transformation. What are the biggest challenges in their day-to-day? How will this solve for those problems? How do we get them on board? Doing detailed discovery, not just from the management team and the senior leadership, but all the way through the business to make sure that everyone who's going to be involved and affected is seeing positive change. Really, really awesome way of thinking from a CFO. One of the very unique perspectives that I took from this episode. And that's it for this episode of What's Cooking. If you got something valuable from Alison's story, send it to another operator who's scaling up and needs a little inspiration from someone who's been there and executed successfully. Until next time.